Thank you. Yeah. Before we start, I just want to remind you that we've got these business cards out on the credenza and over in the fellowship hall. On the back is the prayer for protection. On the front is just some information about Unity of Tampa. So 80% of people who come to a congregation for the first time have come because someone has suggested they come, or they've actually invited them and brought them here. So I always have a couple of these in my wallet. You never know when the conversation is going to get around to spirituality. In fact, the other day I was going into Costco over in Brandon, and there was a guy sitting on the sidewalk in the shade, and he was meditating, sitting on the sidewalk. And I kind of walked by him, and I thought, maybe I should drop one of these cards next to him. As I'm walking back, he kind of came out of it and was looking at me, and I said, I'm curious, it looked like you were meditating. He goes, yeah, more or less. And I said, and I already pulled the card out of my wallet. Well, check this place out. They're into meditation. He goes, oh, thanks. So yeah, you never know. So good morning. There was a mouse and a dove sitting on a tree branch, just kind of relaxing and watching nature unfold. And it started to snow. And they're watching all of the various flakes. And the mouse turns to the dove and says, how much does a snowflake weigh? And the dove thought about it for a moment and thought, well, I don't even know if you can measure the weight of a snowflake. It's like it weighs nothing. And the mouse said, well, I used to think that too. He says, but I noticed one day I was sitting on a branch and it started to snow like this, and after a couple of hours, all of a sudden the branch collapsed underneath me. And I realized that there's a whole lot of nothing weighing down that branch. So if we think that we don't have any effect in the world, I beg to differ. We do. Each of us has the ability to just be able to focus our energy in making this world a better place. And are you that one person who perhaps hasn't given of your spiritual gifts to the world, or perhaps you're not centered? Maybe just you expressing peace in this world will allow that peace to come. The title of the lesson today is Our Pathway to Peace. I'm going to have Duncan put up the slide. I've encouraged everybody here in September and October to read the book Eye of the Storm, Embracing Conflict, Creating Peace. And we've had some book discussion groups and all going for it. It's about being authentic, finding our wholeness in the craziness of this world. So I'm going to quickly review the themes that came before this. The first week was Nothing and Nobody is Against Me. The second week is I Embrace Conflict with Ease. The third week was Love Your Enemies, Releasing Judgment about myself and others. Fourth week was You Are Not Alone. We're all connected, and we're connected with God. The fifth week is See It Right, Not Make It Right. The sixth week was Let Go and Let God. I no longer resist life's challenges as they come upon me. And we also started a 21-day journaling process where we ask ourselves 4 questions at night and kind of journal our answers. And those 4 questions are out on the credenza if you happen to have missed some of these previous weeks. Now, you may have noticed that society doesn't generally seem to teach this way. In fact, they teach the opposite. So if you're having a little difficulty embracing some of these, just go with it for a little bit here. I think what you're going to discover is it's a lot easier, or I should say it's a lot more pleasant to live our life that way. It might not be easy. But my intention in doing this series, as I was planning it this summer, was, I wanted to find a healthy way for us to communicate as individuals, a healthier way for us to communicate as Unity of Tampa. And it was building to this coming Saturday, October 27th. We're going to be doing an Honoring Our Past, Creating Our Future workshop. It's free. I want to have everybody come. It's an opportunity for us to just kind of look at the history of Unity of Tampa, then look to see if we have any unresolved issues or guilt or resentment about that, and having an opportunity to get all of that out of our system, be able to unblock any energy that's been blocked here at Unity of Tampa. So it's from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Now it's important. 9:30 a.m. we're going to kind of close the doors, because after that, once we've started the process, we can't have somebody walking in at 10 or noon. So Just need you to sign up for it so that we know how many people are coming. We want to provide lunch for you as well. So, this week, we're going to look at how to express our true nature. I'm going to have Duncan put up the next slide. In chapter 5 of the book, Gary Simmons, is using, of course, the symbolism of the eye of the storm, the center of a hurricane where everything is peaceful, there's blue sky, and the air is just rushing upwards to bring balance, to the physical world. And he said, he says there are 4 winds of conflict, things that pull us out of that center, pull us out of the eye of the storm. We've got separation, misperception, defensiveness, and competition. So the antidote to separation, as we talked about, is communion, recognizing that we're connected to each other and we're connected with God at all times. The antidote to misperception is spiritual principle. And we talked about expressing faith and love, 2 of our spiritual gifts, two spiritual gifts that were represented by the 12 disciples. Faith is the presence of God is always here. So if you're in a conflict situation, having that faith that, God's going to show me the good in this. And then love, being willing to express that oneness, or to keep it at least in the forefront of our mind. The antidote to defensiveness is non-resistant, being willing to be in the moment, giving our full attention to the situation at hand, being attentive to our feelings and our intuition, but not letting fear run away with the whole situation. There's the choice between love and fear. A lot of people think it's love and hate, but hate is a reaction to fear to try to get assertive in that sense of fear. So, are we expressing love or expressing fear? Now let's get on to that 4th one, which is competitiveness. And the antidote to that is divine purpose. Now, as many of you know, Carla and I traveled, during the 90s teaching prosperity principles at Unity Centers. We visited like 250, New Thought churches during that time. And one of the main principles is divine purpose, that each of us have been given special gifts, passions, and talents. Something that we do really well or that we love to do, and we can just feel the energy flow when we're doing it. And you may just be that you're the best at parenting in the world, whatever it is. Be willing to give of that gift to the world so that we can make this world a better place. Now, Gary expands upon that in this book. Gary Simmons, the author of Eye of the Storm. He talks about actually our purpose is to feel and express our oneness with God as often as we can. And he uses the phrase, the Christ of God. I am the Christ of God. I don't know about you, but as a former Catholic, I kind of cringe a little bit about that. But it's important to understand what the word Christ means. Christ was not Jesus' last name. Christ was a Greek word meaning the Messiah. So as this was all translated into Greek, it was Jesus Christ. The Christ is that divine nature that's in all of us. Jesus was our way shower, showing us how it is we need to operate in the world and how we need to express ourselves. So Christ is that divine level of our being. And in the Gospel of Matthew, 16th chapter, starting with the 13th verse, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets." Now I'm going to pause here because you'll notice, and some people have pointed this out, that apparently back then they believed in reincarnation, that Jesus was a reincarnation of one of the great prophets. So I continue now. And Jesus said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it." Peter represents faith. So Jesus, representing that Christ consciousness within us, we recognize that Christ consciousness is that highest divine nature that we can express. And once we recognize that and are willing to follow it as often as we can, because we often forget, we'll find that we can have a much more pleasant life. So when Gary Simmons in his book says, go ahead and affirm, I am the Christ. His point was start getting used to it. We all have the Christ within us. And we just need to start getting comfortable with that. Now, you may feel you're not perfect. You are a spiritual being having a human experience, and a lot of times this human experience has its flaws. And that goes for me too. But you can understand it when he says, when Jesus says, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So if you have seen that Christ's presence within you, you've seen the totalness of God. And then, of course, he says, I do these works, but these things and greater things shall you do, Jesus said that. I haven't heard that in too many fundamentalist churches, but he says, these things and greater things shall you do. Now in the Gospel of John, 14th chapter, 6th verse, Jesus says to Thomas, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Now among the disciples, Thomas represents understanding. So let's understand the way, the truth, and the life. Let's start with the word the way. As Gary puts it in the book, we're either being the way of Christ or we're being in the way of Christ. Here's a hint. If you're judging, blaming, dishonest, unwilling, unforgiving, doubting, stubborn, unkind, fearful, or just plain negative, odds are you're in the way. But when we express love, when we're willing to get out of the way and allow that Christ's presence to express through us, allow God to move through us in any situation. Take, for example, let's say, you're with a toddler, and you can just feel the love pouring out of yourself, out of your heart to their heart. You pick up the toddler and you hold them, and if you notice, this love is coming through you. You didn't have to go search for it somewhere. You didn't have to open up your wallet for it. And it's abundant. I tease with people, I've got plenty of hugs to go around. I've got plenty of love to go around. Well, that comes from this divine nature, and it's the easiest for us to understand as far as expressing all of this divine substance that's in the world. A lot of us have more challenges expressing it financially, but it's there too. And that's something that once we get into that flow and understand that abundance is there as well, then we find life is more pleasant. So, imagine now that you're standing in front of someone who's caused you heartache or harm. Are you willing to hug that person and express love? A little challenging, isn't it? But not really. If you're willing to get centered once again and express love and say to yourself, okay, God, show me the good in this situation. Or God, help me understand what this person has done or is doing. What we discover is that we all have unmet needs, and what someone has probably done is they've projected onto you some unmet need of theirs. They're trying to get that need met, and if we're willing to dig in a little bit deeper and figure out what that need is, then we can stop arguing about the presenting problem and get down to the real problem and find a solution for it. We do our best to love unconditionally, accept people as they are. Okay, let's move on to the second word, the truth of God. In a situation, be willing to say, what's the truth in this situation? I mean, there's so much misinformation out there these days. How can we be sure that we know the truth about the situation unless we're willing to open and be receptive to digging for that? In the Gospel of John, 8th chapter, 31st verse, Jesus said to them, if you follow my teachings, you are truly my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. The truth will make you free. Have we imprisoned ourselves? The word freedom is thrown around a lot in the world, but freedom doesn't mean that you can do anything you want. The freedom is that you just need to be who you truly need to be, and that is to just be authentic. Be willing to open your heart and express in the world. Our task is to shun the negative messages that are out there. For example, Jesus walks into the pool of Bethesda, and there's a guy lying there. He's been laying there for 38 years, on a pad, and wants to be healed. Now, Jesus didn't walk up to him and say, gee, tough luck, buddy. You're in my thoughts and prayers. What he said is, are you willing to be healed? And the man said, yes. And Jesus said, well, then stand up, take your pad and go. And sure enough, the guy did it. So are we willing to see the truth in this situation? This guy was willing to be healed, and the symbolism of it is he's open to the Christ consciousness, and his physical malady or problem went away. Are we willing to advocate for the truth in any situation? Not being inconsiderate, but being willing to say, okay, God, show me the good in this. And then there's the life of God. Of course, life pulsates, through the earth, through all of God's creatures, big and small. You'll notice, though, if you're out in nature, though, you'll come across maybe a tree or a bush that's full of life, and the branches, you can bend, they're compliant, but then you find branches or trees that have died. It just takes a little bit of effort to break a branch. There's a brittleness. So what kind of energy are you putting out there? As Gary Simmons says in the book, can we express a childlike, youthful atmosphere? If a conversation becomes blaming or condescending, are we willing to be open and understanding? And to be willing to take the approach and the attitude that all things are possible. So the antidote to competitiveness is divine purpose. Now, throughout this whole process, I've used the two words an awful lot, and that is get centered. And what specifically does that mean? And in the chapter 10 of the book, Gary Simmons goes a little bit deeper. And we'll explore this a little bit more in the meditation here in a few minutes. But what he says is, be willing to kind of get into a meditative state, but just a matter of relaxing, taking a breath, and then drawing your focus from your head down to your heart, and then from your heart down to your navel. And then he says about 1.5 inches below your navel, and then behind it, kind of between your stomach and your spine, is kind of that center of gravity, the center. And when we draw our focus there, we tend to feel that divine presence more strongly when we're willing to do that. It's the center of the spiritual being that's having the human experience. So it's the center of that human being as well. And in Chinese, they call it the gateway of qi, that the divine energy flows through there. And often when I'm doing a healing meditation with someone, I'll have them picture that center, and then that center just kind of glowing outward. Every little light ray just hitting every cell and molecule in their bodies. Renewing, revitalizing. That's what the center is. So are you willing to get centered? So whenever we find ourselves confronted by the unpleasant, draw the attention to the center. And then be willing to ask questions like, what am I making this mean? Because our minds are always trying to find some explanation. So are we willing to be open and receptive to God's living spirit of truth? Am I coming from love or am I coming from fear? Am I truly open to divine guidance? Every week we've been working with an affirmation. It's printed in your bulletin for you to work with this week. I'm going to have Duncan put that affirmation up on the screen right now. I'll read it through once and then we'll say it together. I now bring the energy of peace into every relationship, every room, and every situation. I am a blessing to the world. Okay, let's say that together. I now bring the energy of peace into every relationship, every room, and every situation. I am a blessing to the world. And I'll have Duncan put up this week's takeaways if you want to just jot these down. As I said, the antidote to competitiveness is divine purpose. Recognizing first, of course, what are our gifts? What do we do well? What's our contribution to the world? Don't discount what it is that you do well and what you love. You're here to do that, and we've been waiting for you to do it all of this time. So, number 2, of course, get centered. Number 3, the way. The way of God is to express unconditional love. Number 4, the truth. See the good in situations. See the God in the situation. God, show me the good in this. And then number 5, life. Expressing life. A flexible, childlike, youthful atmosphere. Now, in the book, The Eye of the Storm, Embracing Conflict, Creating Peace, we, of course, spent a lot of time talking about embracing conflict, so let's create peace together. And Gary writes in the last paragraph of his book on chapter 155, we are all called to be peacemakers as a pathway to God and as a demonstration of our wholeness and worth. The entire universe supports us in making peace wherever we are, and in every storm that comes upon us. No one is against us. Make your pathway to God a demonstration of this truth. For blessed are you who have been called to make peace in the world that longs to know its wholeness and its worth. Our closing story is from the CBS Evening News about two people who are trying to be less competitive.